How you doing, everybody? It's Wardy here, and we got some breaking Mets news to get into that has come out over the past hour at the time of recording this. Originally from Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic, stating the following: the New York Mets have signed starting pitcher Griffin Canning to a one-year $4.25 million deal with potential of a $1 million bonus there depending on how the year goes there for Canning with the Mets. I want to see your initial reactions in the comments down below, because I know we're going to have a lot of fans with the initial reaction saying, Wardy, this is sleepy Stearns. This is a bargain bin shopping type acquisition for the rotation, and now we're done. We are absolutely screwed for 2025. I'm here to tell you that common sense and widespread reporting would lead you to believe that no, this is nothing more than a swingman, a depth starter pickup for the Mets, the likely final depth starter that the Mets acquire this offseason, as they are still very active in the hunt for a more quality starting pitcher, whether that is a Sean Manaea, a Luis Castillo, or to a certain lesser degree, a Walker Buehler, a Nick Pivetta, among other trade options as well available in the market. We're going to highlight more, but also everything you need to know on Griffin Canning, why I like this move to a degree for the Mets, and why ultimately David Stearns made this decision to acquire him, that we highlighted from last night's live stream initially. So continue to let me know your initial reactions in the comments down below. Thank you so much for smashing that like and subscribe on, and also thank you guys so much for hearing from our amazing sponsor here at BetUS that has you covered with all your sports betting needs. Head over to betus.com.pa today, folks, because we have you covered when it comes to a 150% bonus on your first deposit, 125 on your second and third, up to $2,000, all by using our amazing promo code here at YouTube150 at betus.com.pa. And folks, with my latest bet here, I'm hammering my bias bet in my New York Knicks there at plus 2.5 there to either win outright or make sure that they don't lose by more than 2.5 points against the Minnesota Timberwolves there in Minnesota tomorrow night, which I'm so excited about. And I actually thought the game was tonight, so shame on me for having my days confused, but no less, feel free to tail that bet should you guys wish. But please know I'm not a sports betting expert, just a diehard sports fan, certainly a diehard Knicks fan that's very excited to see Karl-Anthony Towns matching up against the T-Wolves for the first time in the regular season since being traded. Dante DiVincenzo, Big Julius Randle. I'm really excited for this matchup. I think it's going to be a great one. Hope you guys are locked in on that, to all my basketball fans out there. But now, let's reel back into this one, everybody, and let's highlight everything you need to know here on Griffin Canning, because as I mentioned, we first highlighted him yesterday because our buddy on the channel, Pat Ragazzo, who's on the beat for the Mets through Sports Illustrated there, we saw over the past couple days, noted how the Mets were showing interest in Griffin Canning, and the initial gut reaction to many Mets fans was like, oh my goodness gracious, we're really going to acquire this guy and essentially hope that he's going to be our number 4 starter next season, which no one is asking for. But the reality is, this is nothing more than, again, a depth starter. As we look through Fangraphs, actually, as we look through their depth chart right now, as I'm going to pan this to the right that you guys can see, Griffin Canning is currently slotted as the Mets' number 6 starter, if not number 7, with already Kodai Senga, Frankie Montas, David Pearson, Clay Holmes, and Paul Blackburn in the mix. Not even talking about Tyler McGill and what is inevitably going to be the uprise in Brandon Sproat, our top pitching prospect that I firmly believe will crack this rotation, if not out of spring training, at some point in the first half of the season. That feels inevitable as long as he continues trending the way that he has. So adding Canning, what do you add? A full-time innings eater, a guy that can come in right away and give the Mets multi-inning relief as a swingman or as a 6/7th starter for the Mets that are inevitably going to right around a 6-man rotation in 2025. Already with the likes of Clay Holmes, that we know will be stretched as a starter, as he said in his presser yesterday, is hoping to be in the range of 160 innings or so from the Mets in 2025 as a starter, with Frankie Montas' numbers on 5 days rest right around a 3.75 ERA to a much higher ERA last season when on 4 days rest during his time with the Reds and the Brewers, tells you that he will benefit from further rest just over a year removed from his serious shoulder injury. And there that we saw in the likes of potentially a guy in Walker Buehler, the Mets potentially bring him in for the rotation per se. He will be coming off of his second year of TJ. Further reason as to why the Mets like these guys is because they're coming off of injury, but they're also coming off of a year where they went through their injury-riddled year already, rehabbing, still getting back from injury, whereas now they're fully fresh and ready to go, and the Mets want to buy in on that upside. In the case of upside with a guy in Canning here, what you're getting is, again, a innings eater, and we have a much deeper dive that we're going to break down shortly in this fantastic thread by Remy here on X. Shout out to him, and also shout out to Isaac Groffman, my pitching contributor, for informing me on him and his game. But on the baseline numbers, before we deep dive a bit more here on Canning in a second, everybody, he's an interesting cat for the Mets and what he will be bringing to us, especially because this is a guy that is coming off of a career-high season that we saw with the LA Angels in innings pitched. Nothing overly impressive when looking at the numbers, with a 5.1 ERA, a 4.71 expected ERA, a 5.26 FIP, a 4.84 SI ERA, a 1.4 WHIP. This was certainly a guy that was more so of an inning eater than anything else last season, but at just 28 years of age, and also that was a part of that Jorge Soler trade. That was another bizarre lopsided deal that we saw not long ago, where Soler was traded there to the LA Angels as a salary dump. Canning was the guy going the other way to the Atlanta Braves. He did not, in fact, crack the Braves roster, and he was available, and that's why the Mets were able to sign him after, I believe, he was non-tendered. So Canning, what would have been potentially a guy still in a similar role there with the Braves, if not a little bit higher, because they don't have as much rotation depth, especially after losing Max Fried. In the case of the Mets have all the depth on the roll now. They have quality depth, which is a big thing, especially in a guy in Canning who, with his multi-pitch mix, a fastball that isn't looking too great, but the changeup and curveball certainly play and have solid shape to them, and that's what he's going to hone in more on, and also rework that arsenal a bit more with a fastball that's been an absolute meatball. When Canning gets hit, he has definitely been hit hard, as we look per his baseball savant numbers this past season with the LA Angels against some putrid percentiles. But the reason why I'm not at all stressed by this is because, one, he's entering now the Mets pitching lab there with Desi Drewskill and Jeremy Hefner, and they have done wonders with a lot of pitchers over the past year, not only for Jeremy Hefner in the organization with the lab, but Desi in his own right working there with Matt Blake and the Yankees this past couple seasons as their assistant pitching coach. But now what you have here in Canning, who has the four-seam change, slide piece, curveball, and sink mix, I'd expect that sinker to be reworked back in that arsenal more, and I expect him to be fully utilized as, again, that swingman type starter, a guy that the Mets can defer to, especially if, say, because of doubleheaders and things of that nature, where you need more guys in a pinch. That's where Canning comes into play. He's really a rubber arm where you can throw him in any situation imaginable, whether that's going to be in multi-inning relief, whether that's going to be for a one-inning relief, whether that's going to be as a spot starter for the Mets for 3, 4, 5 innings, whether that is going to be actually as a rotation piece for a period of time because of injuries, and maybe Canning shows us further upside than what we've seen. Maybe he looks fantastic that we see in spring training, and then as your sixth starter to begin the year, maybe he bests between himself and Tyler McGill coming out of camp, and he is given an opportunity to get some rotation starts, but rotation starts not on as frequent of a level, depending on how long the Mets go from a 6-man rotation to a 5-man. How much do they rotate that 6-man spot as well? That is something that I'm sure the Mets may consider throughout the course of the season. They want as many depth pieces as possible, because no championship team gets anywhere without having quality depth. And when I say quality depth, I mean even your 6, 7, 8, and even potentially 9 starters have MLB-wide upside the way that Canning certainly does. Now, to expand a little bit further here on Canning and his game, I'm going to defer to, again, this fantastic pitching thread that was made here by Remy, and I'm going to butcher the last name, so I'm not going to try, but you guys can see the handle there to the top corner there, as we see project starting pitcher number 1, Griffin Canning, pros, occlusion, deception, above average shapes on the slider and changeup, above average zone rates on the slider and changeup. The cons: bad fastball shape, injury history, and fastball gets crushed. Again, he does have a meatball of a heater. We have to bear that in mind. Background info: Canning, as we saw, 28-year-old, is a high slot pronator with a narrow ISA, and pronator pitchers are something that we've emphasized on the channel over the past year, thanks to our pitching contributor Isaac Groffman. Canning has exceptional deception because of his ability to hide his arm in his delivery. He hides his throwing arm behind his lead arm and then fires immediately. Here's his best MLB fastball that we guys can see right here. Just again how well he's going to look there through the highlights. There you go. and that he was throwing around 91, I believe. Then we see here on the first and easiest fix for Canning is his usage change. Everyone knows his fastball isn't great in terms of stuff or raw shape, but his secondary offerings are comfortably plus in results in shape. I'd bump the change slide up combo to around 30% versus both hands to protect the fastball. And I like that idea as well, and that's, I'm sure, exactly what the Mets are going to do. They're going to change the complete usage of the arsenal. They're going to try to change the pitch shape there, which is what Desi Driscoll, when the Mets hired as the assistant pitching coach from the Yankees, brought in for things like specifically that. His heavy emphasis on pitch shape and the ability to manipulate it, but in a proper way. That's what the Mets are going to try to do here in Canning, I'm sure. The next fix relies on his current poor fastball shape. For that, we see with the four seam, he uses a standard four seam grip, but I like to try shifting to Garrett Cole grip a la a Luke Weaver, or play around with tucking the thumb. And mind you, Remy, who I'm referencing right now, does a fantastic job on advanced pitching metrics and information on breakdowns of pitchers. He, like Isaac Groppin, is a fantastic pitching guru that has been doing his own things separate there out of the Mets space. This is just a breakdown that he has going back to November 29th here on Griffin Canning. For the slider, for the sinker, his current shape blends with his four seam. That can, the shapes are at 93 miles per hour. It's 16 induced vertical break, 8 inches of horizontal break, and 93 miles per hour, 13 IVB and 14 HB. Due to his high slot height and pronation bias, I'd move to a one seam. Q, is a throw like, Q is to throw like a regular four seam. Main goal, kill 6 inches of induced vertical break and differentiate from change up the four seam fastball shapes. The last fix I work on with Canning is to get back to his 2023 mechanics, because he was throwing his hardest and had his best performance that year. Reaching different positions mechanically, more supinated reps equals less velocity, but could be more craftier and more precise in doing so. So great breakdown by Remy, and I appreciate that greatly about him. And as we go back into breaking down Canning a little bit, as we see through his numbers per Fangraphs, this is a guy who had a sub 7 K per 9 to a 3.4 walks per 9. Not a good K to walk ratio at all, and I understand that. I also understand he was with the LA Angels, and as I spoke in our live stream yesterday and have timelessly, and I'll say it again, the LA Angels understanding how to properly develop pitching is the equivalent of the Wilpons trying to understand how to be competent owners. These things simply don't happen the ways that Artie Moreno is in so many ways the Wilpons there out west, and has been for well too long, and Angels fans know that best. The main problem there that we see is that they don't have a superior analytics department. They don't use advanced information. They certainly do not have a lab at all like what the Mets are currently building. So taking Angels pitching numbers with anything more than a grain of salt, I think, would actually be silly, because if we look at the years of what proper pitchers have come out of the Angels organization, has been very few of guys that have actually been homegrown talents, or it's guys that are absolutely throwing gas, but they're heavily reliant on said gas, and you have to wonder about their long-term ability and projection on the MLB level, i.e. Ben Joyce, for example. So in the case of the Angels, I think that they are just a prime example of a guy that certainly showed that after having 170 innings this past season, north of 130 the year prior, then only 50 and 60 from the 2020-2021 season, had 90 in his first year there with the Angels, but was thrown into things right away there in 2019. I think taking him out of what is not a pitching lab there with the Halos, and what is certainly is one with Stearns, Hefner, and certainly Desi Driscoll, is going to bode him well. So what are we looking at floor versus ceiling, folks? The floor here and someone in Griffin Canning is that he doesn't even crack the Mets roster out of camp. He finds himself on the outside looking in. The Mets just DFA him outright. When we look at the ceiling in Griffin Canning, you're looking at someone who could play up to the potential of a fifth man starter in this rotation. That is how much upside he still has, given his youth, given his 5-pitch mix, and knowing that the Mets are going to really dabble with them a lot and see what they can work with. So highest upside, I would say, is a fifth starter at absolute best. Lowest, we're looking at a guy that'll be a DFA there, potentially coming out of camp. And we're also looking at a guy that I think is going to find himself in the middle as that swingman swingman type. It gets reps as a starter, but it also gets reps as a reliever, which is something that he's not completely foreign to. He had a couple relief outings that we saw in 2023. He had one this past season. He had one in 2021. So even though it wasn't too common, it has happened. And I'd anticipate that to be a greater magnitude than it ever has been, should he not become the best thing since sliced bread thanks to this pitching lab and Jeremy Hefner and everyone else involved. But folks, that is going to do it with the Griffin Canning signing. Let me know how you guys feel about this. If you're for it, if you're against it, if you're like, okay, this is another depth move, we move on. As a final thing I want to emphasize with each and every one of you is simply this. Please know that this is a depth move for a reason. This is a 6-7 starter type with upside of a 5, and at absolute worst, again, a guy that is going to be a reliever for you or is going to be DFA'd cut outright. So please understand that context before continuing to inevitably go in the comments and saying David Stearns is sleeping, we're not going to add another starter. Guys, I would understand that sentiment far more if Walker Buehler, Sean Manaea, Nick Pivetta, Luis Castillo, Jesus Luzardo, and so many of the other key arms still available out there in both the free agent and trade market. If that wasn't the case, we would have a different discussion. And also Corbin Burns, who we discussed earlier today, check that video out, how the Mets may actually have a shot at landing him still, thanks to a unique circumstance that could become present in similarity to pitchers that we've seen from an offseason ago or so. So check out that video if you guys haven't already. Thank you guys so much for the support. Let us know your continued thoughts down below on what's next for the Mets, which will be, again, another starter move, but of greater significance, a true starter move of a guy that'll be as good of an ace or at absolute worst at number 3 for you likely in the 2025 season. So thank you guys again. As always, no matter what, let's go Mets, baby. Peace out.